Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. There's still people coming in the room, but I'll get started. We've got a lot to go through, so thanks for coming to this. Quick introduction. My name is Ray Heffer. I work for VMware. I'm an end-user computing architect based out in the UK. You can probably tell by my accent. Also a double VCDX, and the reason I mention that, there's a theme later in the presentation I'm going to mention. So I'm VCDX in data center and desktop as well. In fact, quick show of hands, any VCDXs in the room? Anyone planning to take their VCDX defense? No, I encourage you to do it. So this is very exciting. Let me just introduce Shengbo Teng. He's from Beijing. And
yes.
Yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Shengbo from Beijing as a senior developer, and I'm working with Ray on this side too. My greatest honor.
Yeah, no, Shengbo has been fantastic. This sizing tool, I'm sure many of you this will resonate with. About 2 years ago, I was working in professional services, and before I joined the end-user computing technical enablement and marketing team, and I had a spreadsheet. I'm sure you've got spreadsheets for sizing environments, and you're doing designs, and back of a napkin, and notes on your phone or whatever. There was no good way or a consistent way of sizing in these environments. And there's tools out there. I won't mention the name. There's someone's blog, and you can download a Java sizing tool. That's great, but you've got that on your laptop. If it's updated, then you need to download it again, or how do you know there's an update? But anyway, let's get started. So you've seen that disclaimer before, I'm sure, about 1,000 times this week. I won't read that. So let me just build this slide out. There's some marketing. You saw this at the keynote. I'm sure you were at the keynote yesterday, and you saw Sanjay Poonen come up on stage. That guy's full of energy. I wish I had that much energy. I think Starbucks helped him with that in the morning. But anyway, this is what we're talking about here, that Horizon or end-user computing, but if you look at just Horizon 6, since when I started at VMware almost 5 years ago, it was VMware View. In fact, before I was a customer working on VDM2 beta. Who remembers that? So now we've got AirWatch, we've got Workspace Suite, there's Identity Manager, there's ThinApp, there's App Volumes, and there's Cloud Pod Architecture, and there's now Linux desktops, and there's vGPU. The list goes on. It's a huge suite of features and products. Yeah, you've seen this. Again, Sanjay presented this. So AirWatch Mobile, this is exciting really, because we're now highest in the top quadrant there, as Gartner has shown. And same for Horizon Desktop, with our little bubble there is just above Citrix. So we're leading this. Now, as a consultant or an architect, I know the challenges that you guys have in sizing environments, and certainly now when you look at multiple use cases, and we'll cover this in the session. So let's get started. We're going to start off talking about the design methodology. And as a VCDX and also a panelist, this is something we look for. We need a consistent, solid methodology. So how do you design a Horizon 6 environment? I was speaking to a customer just the other day who had already gone down the process of implementing Horizon, but there's a number of things you need to do. I'd say key success factors that you need to consider. I'll cover that. I'll talk about pod and block architecture. In fact, quick show of hands, who's familiar with that term, pod and block architecture? Great, so majority of you. And I'll cover that, so if you're not aware of that, I can talk about that as well. Then I'll dive into some sizing best practices. And then by the end of that, you're going to think, oh, this is a lot to remember. How am I going to do all this? And then that's where we sort of save the day and show you this sizing tool. So it's very exciting. Yeah, so I won't reveal any more yet. There's going to be a live demo as well. So design methodology. I'd say this first step is still often overlooked, but this is really, really critical to successfully deploying a Horizon 6 environment. When I say assessment, obviously I'm talking about understanding the current environment. So physical desktops, what are they doing today? What are the applications that are running? Who are the different user categories or use cases in the organization? Where are they? Where are they located? Understanding that is critical. We use third-party tools in professional services at VMware. There's tools, for example, Lakeside, Systrack, that's fantastic. Liquidware Labs have Stratosphere, and those guys are in the Solutions Exchange. So if you do get time today, I'd certainly recommend going to talk to them. but we need to get that baseline view. We need to know what's going on. And just so you're aware, these tools, there's an agent you can deploy on the physical desktop infrastructure. It's very lightweight. It just gathers all this data for you. And this is critical because you can then, as a consultant, before you work on a design, you can fully understand, okay, what's this use case doing? So, for example, finance. At an end of quarter, they might be running some crazy macro in Excel, which has CPU spikes, that kind of thing. So you really need to understand that. And obviously then, as our design methodology goes on, there's discovery. So this is a given, really. You're in workshops with customers, you're talking about their requirements, and this is where we want to capture what are the business requirements, what's the drivers for them wanting Horizon 6. Now, I'm sure some of you had this as well. I've actually had a customer come up to me and they said, we want Horizon 6, and I want virtual SAN, and I want this. I said, great, what are your business requirements? They said, we don't, it's just cool, isn't it? It's the latest. It's like, yeah, but we need to address business requirements for that. So we need to do this. So at that discovery phase, we'd normally run a proof of concept as well. We set up a POC environment, prove the technology, make sure it's going to work for the customer. And then plan and design. And this is I like this bit, this is what I do, is design. So high level, conceptual designs, you take all that discovery, you start looking at the assessment you've collected. Hopefully that's been running by this point for 3, maybe 4 weeks. You're really capturing a good snapshot of what's going on. Then you start creating the design itself. Now the reason I mention this is this sizing tool that we've created, it's still beta. It's internally available. It's available currently today to select partners. We will be opening this up, so you will get access eventually, but we want to show you this, and we want feedback as well, because we want to get this right. And we're not suggesting by any means that this sizing tool is going to give you all the information you need to do a physical design. And when I say physical design, that's the detail. That's all the fine detail of how many hosts and the availability. Think of this as a companion. This is a tool. Just like any other calculator, it's not going to do the job for you. You need meaningful data to put into it. You need to use that data and use the results of the sizing tool to create your physical design. So we're not saying or suggesting that you use this to size production workloads, and there you go, it's done the physical design for you. You would use this, I'd say, during the discovery phase. You're getting a good idea of what the architecture looks like for your environment or for your customer's environment with Horizon 6, and of course all these features. We have direct pass-through for graphics, VDGA, we have vGPU. On Sunday, NVIDIA announced the new Maxwell M60 cards, so that if you saw that, that's exciting. It's double the density. It's constantly changing. Maximums and the supported limits is changing. So this is one of the reasons we want to use this to guide you through. So after the plan and design, build and test. Now, you wouldn't start here. I know a lot of customers do. They just want to get going and start building, and more often than not, the executive says, oh, that's amazing, let's get going. And before you know it, you've got production users on this test environment that you created, and it's too late. So that's why we have this design methodology. But this build and test as well, this is to validate your design. So you've come up with your design assumptions, you've run your POC, and this is where you think, okay, this is now, before this goes into production, you might have ordered some server hardware. That's load test. Let's see what this is doing. Quick show of hands, who's seen View Planner or used View Planner? Great, okay, good number of you. So View Planner is a VMware tool that simulates a user workload. So take, for example, you've got a cluster in a rack. Let's just say there's 32 hosts in there. You can spin up hundreds and hundreds, or thousands of virtual desktops. So if you've sized for, say, let's just say for argument's sake, 70 virtual desktops on every host, you deploy that with View Planner. Every desktop then will launch PowerPoint, it will launch Outlook, it will play a video, it might open an email, sit there for 20 seconds, like the user's gone to have a think about it, then open an attachment. It's really, really good. And the point of it is you're load testing, and there's random nature to it. Not every machine is doing exactly the same thing. You're load testing, and you're able to then to validate your design assumptions. So, okay, so while there's a heavy load, what happens if there's a failure? You pull a blade out. What did your design include for high availability? Does that work? So that's the purpose of that. And of course, that's never the end. You may have deployed then to production, but there's always things you discover, feedback from your users. There's some fine tuning you need to do, and then always review. So think of the sizing tool, which we're going to show you in a moment, as a companion to this, and certainly the early stages. We have this design wheel. I don't know if you've seen this before. I try and keep this in my head, especially when I'm working with a customer. And in fact, I had a customer meeting on Monday, and we were talking about this. So one of the things that the sizing tool will help with is following this process. So you need to understand the use cases. So I mentioned this assessment. You've run this tool, you've got reports and reports of data, and okay, your top hitting applications, which applications are using the most CPU or memory. And we start breaking that down into use cases. And you guys out there as consultants or architects, you will do that. You'll define these use cases, finance or facilities groups, engineering, and so on. And we need to translate that to pool design. So these are the desktop pools. And obviously now there's Windows 7, Windows 10, Linux, might be RDSH sessions. You might be using remote desktop services with Microsoft and running sessions on there. But these are pools, application pools as well. And then from that, we need to understand the pod and block design. And I'll explain what pod and block is in the next slide. vSphere design. And I always say to my fellow data center VCDXs, I said, yeah, engineers computing, it's the VCDX data center, but we've got to know everything else on top of that as well. So, we're far, far cleverer than you. They don't like that. Storage, networking. Obviously, we have virtual SAN, networking now, there's NSX. There's more and more technologies all the time. Adding into the mix of what we're doing when we're creating a design. 3-4 years ago, I was just making a choice between a standard virtual switch and a distributed virtual switch. Well, look where we are today with NSX. It's very feature rich. And I mentioned the customer meeting. I was in Monday. They missed this step, end user device design. Let me give you an example. There was a customer that ordered several thousand Zero clients. Those are still in a storeroom with dust all over them. And the reason being is they just trying to get ahead and order the hardware. Maybe there's a special offer going on, I don't know. But their primary use case for their workforce was to use Link 2013. Now, Microsoft have a VDI plugin for Link, but it doesn't work on Zero clients. It has to be a Windows device, and they couldn't use that. So this is key. That's the type of thing you're looking out for. So here's pod and block. Let me explain what pod and block's all about. This is more of a guide. This isn't rigid, but we have this notion of blocks. And each block is a vCenter server, essentially. So over the last few years, we've said for desktops, don't deploy more than 2,000 desktops managed by a single vCenter server. But today, we support up to 10,000. Just because you can support 10,000 desktops in a vCenter server, don't do it. You don't size for the maximums, unless you would like to lead a stressful life. So we say around 2,000 desktops per block. So you can see the vCenter server there. We've got another block, another vCenter server. We have Composer in each block as well, or associated with each block. And what our block is, it's a collection of vSphere clusters. They're running our desktops. There's storage, that's virtual SAN. It could be local storage. It could be with local storage, a third-party vendor, Atlantis, for example. Atlantis have in-memory storage, which is great. Shared storage, your virtual switch. And this is how we define, this is how we scale Horizon. So if we think, okay, 2,000 or say 3,000 per block, how do we scale? So today we might deploy a few thousand desktops to the workforce. As we scale, we deploy another block, and we know what that means. We know when you've done the design, well, this is another 2 clusters, for example. We need to deploy another vCenter, another Composer server. And then we have our management blocks. At the bottom, that bottom layer is a separate cluster. In fact, there'll be another vCenter server managing that, which is not shown on the diagram. We would always recommend you have a dedicated vCenter for your management, for all your server. So connection servers, you might have a file server for for your thin app repository, for example, your vCenter servers, Composer. But this enables us to really scale. Your management block is solid, that's your foundation. You may have 2 or 3 hosts depending on the size of your environment, but as you scale your desktops, you deploy multiple blocks. So that's what pod and block is all about, pods and blocks. Then we have this notion of cloud pod. A quick show of hands, who's familiar with Cloud Pod architecture? Okay, great, good number of you. So let me explain Cloud Pod. Before Cloud Pod existed, a View Pod was essentially an instance of View. So however many connection servers we've got, say 2, 3 connection servers. But you couldn't put, or you shouldn't put, those connection servers across a WAN. Because between the connection servers, there's a messaging service called JMS, or Java Messaging Service. That has to be LAN latency, so basically 0 milliseconds. Will it work if you have 2 data centers in a campus with 1 or 2 milliseconds possibly between them? Yes, but it's not supported. They will give you best endeavor support, but we say a pod, a View Pod, that instance of View has to remain in a LAN, in a data center. But this posed a problem because, certainly projects I've worked on, they've got 2 data centers. They want this active deployment, but you'd have 2 separate pods. They don't know about each other. So what you do over here, you have to repeat over here. But the big challenge there is how do you decide which users access that one and which users access that one, which data center, where's the application servers, and so on. So we introduced this with Horizon 6, Cloud Pod. Cloud Pod architecture basically wraps over. So you can we support 2 sites. So you may have a site in London. So let's imagine we have a data center in London with our View Pod. And that's up to 10,000 desktops in a pod, by the way. New York has another View Pod, maybe another 10,000 in there. You make those part of a cloud pod, so now they know about each other. This is where this is important. To the end user, they don't care about all these different desktop pools. They just want to log in and click on their desktop. So you have, with Cloud Pod, something called a global entitlement. And a global entitlement, they can be entitled to local pools in London and local pools in New York. But where they're connecting, and there may be an F5 load balancer, or it could be NetScaler, whatever it is you're doing for global site load balancing, it depends where they're connecting. You can have rules, say, with F5, that if they're connecting in New York, they connect to the New York site, because that's where they're closest to. But you can, with Cloud Pod, say, no, your application servers are in London, so we want your virtual desktop always to be in London. So it connects them through to London. Or there may be a roaming user, and you might say, no, just connect them to a desktop closest to where they are. So Cloud Pod's really powerful. It doesn't do load balancing on its own. You still need that third-party load balancer. But Cloud Pod now enables us to go up to 20,000 sessions in a Cloud Pod. And don't be surprised if this goes up as version numbers increase. But this is where we are today. So a Cloud Pod can have, remember, it's 2 sites, but we can have 4 pods. So we may have 2 pods in London and 2 pods in New York. But the overall limit is still 20,000. So with that in mind, we have a whole bunch of other factors. So there's provisioning. There's 10,000, I mentioned, desktop sessions in a pod. We use our multiple vCenters to achieve that. We have our concurrent provisioning operations and so on. So these are all the factors we look at when we're sizing and designing a Horizon 6 environment. I'm not going to list all these out one by one, but you can see the kind of considerations we need to make. I mentioned there's 4 View Pods to a Cloud Pod. There's 2 sites, 10,000 sessions per pod, and so on. These are the limits. And incidentally, there's no official configuration maximums like there is for vSphere for Horizon 6. Now, I've blogged about it, and I've been very clear to say this is what I'd say is a best practice or recommended maximum, and this is a supported maximum. I've tried to differentiate between the two, but these change. And I think this is the problem with spreadsheets and sizing tools and all the different methods we use to determine really what we want to know is how many hosts do we need, how many clusters, how many pods, to try and work all this out. And this as versions increase, we have limits increase and maximums change and so on, and new features go in. So the point here is there's a lot to consider. Then we have storage sizing. Some things really here. Type of desktop is one example. Is it a link clone or is it a full clone? Maybe your use cases for Linux desktops. In fact, I spoke to, in the last session, a number of you have university use cases. They want to use Linux. They're full clones only today. We don't have link clones or that notion of link clones with Linux desktops. So you need to bear that in mind and size that. And as I said before, do avoid the limits. Just because you can have 2,000 desktops in a desktop pool, don't do it. You've got to recompose that pool. Maybe you're doing a recompose every week for updates. That's a lot of users you're impacting. So don't just size because that's the limit. And performance. Here Yeah, okay, so here, this is an interesting one, IOPS. Around 25 IOPS on average, 200 as a peak. That really depends. I can guarantee that at least half this room will disagree with that. Maybe you've got lower, maybe it's higher. This is one of the reasons we do the assessment. We really need to understand what is the storage characteristics of our workloads. There may be, in fact, an interesting one, there's what we call a task work or an office user use case. It's just Office, Outlook. The customer said, really light workload. The assessment tool discovered that the IOPS were just through the roof, hundreds of IOPS in a day. And I thought, what is going on here? They're just using Word. What's happening? They use a document management system, and there's a plugin. And on every desktop, it was indexing, and there's log files, and it's constantly writing, and it's got this big search index. They didn't actually need that feature turned on. We spoke to the document management vendor, and they said, yeah, we can turn that off. That shouldn't be on there. And that was to say, well, they didn't know that, because in the physical desktops, every desktop, you've got your own hard disk, and that's masked. The user doesn't see a performance impact, but you don't want to move that to the data center and impact your storage for vSphere. So the key here is make sure you consider storage. CBRC, that's content-based read cache. Now with vSphere, you can use up to 2 gig of host memory. With Horizon, we call it View Storage Accelerator, or VSA, but essentially it's leveraging that, and you can see efficiencies of up to 70%. So what this is doing is a read cache. So that boot storm, in the morning, they all log in at the same time. If every host is using 2 gig of memory to cache those read IOPS, you can see some really good results there. So enable that. Then there's capacity. We have SE sparse. This is our space-efficient sparse disk format where we can reclaim. So imagine with a linked clone, you can have a persistent linked clone desktop. And obviously over time, as there's files being copied in there and data changes, that linked clone will grow up to the size of the replica disk, the master image. But if you want to reclaim that space back, you have to today do a recompose or refresh that desktop. But with SE sparse, you can have a schedule running. So it runs this reclamation process and claws that space back. So you can benefit from a linked clone and the ability to refresh or recompose rather than a full clone, but have the space savings as well. So there's another factor. So you get the theme, that goes on. And obviously the virtual desktop sizing itself, the compute, how much memory do you need, how many vCPUs do you need on each virtual desktop, and so on. And here we go, there's a whole load of text for you. You will get a copy of these slides, by the way. You'll get access to any of the sessions. They're recorded, so you will get to take this away. But just some things to consider. We're saying size for 25 IOPS per VM if you need a conservative estimate. Again, this really depends. Don't take that with a pinch of salt. Could be IOPS on average, could be 80. It really depends on the workload. This is, again, why we say the assessment is so important. And we'll get into the sizing tool. So we're going to solve a lot of these challenges. And I've mentioned some of this, link clones, use SE sparse disks to save that. Memory reservation is an interesting one. Hopefully, all your vSphere hosts have enough memory, and you can actually guarantee, you can reserve 100% of your virtual machine memory. If you can do that and you've sized the environment correctly, what you're saving is that virtual swap file, because when you reserve memory on a virtual machine, if it's 100%, it doesn't need a virtual swap file. It's guaranteed that memory anyway. It's not going to power on unless the memory is there. So you're eliminating that virtual swap. Now, on larger workloads where you might have 4, 8, or even with some 3D use cases, I've seen 16 gig virtual desktops. That would be, if you don't do the memory reservation, that's a 16 gigabyte virtual swap file for every desktop. So there's some storage savings through doing that. And then I mentioned RDSH. This is our remote desktop sessions. When we talk about VDI, we don't necessarily mean virtual desktops. We have sessions now in RDSH, and with Horizon 6.2, the next release, we're going to be supporting vGPU, so 3D workloads in an RDSH session. And if you're interested, there's a session at 3 o'clock this afternoon, Beyond the Marketing with Horizon 6, and we talk about that in a bit more detail. Now here's a figure. The default session maximum on your RDSH farm in Horizon is 150. Do not have 150 sessions per RDSH host unless everyone's just using Notepad, and then that'll probably be fine. So just because it says 150, change it. What do you change it to? It really depends. Around 32 sessions. We've been doing this for years. I remember back in the 90s, I picked up a set of floppy disks that had Citrix WinFrame written on it. I said, wow, what's this? Obviously, that technology has evolved far, as we are today. But we've been doing this a long time, and we see this is the sweet spot, but again, it depends on the workload, what those sessions are doing. So around 32 sessions on the host. For the RDSH virtual machines, this is the RDS hosts themselves, don't overcommit on the CPU. So try and use one-to-one. So if you have, say, 2 physical CPU sockets, maybe 10 cores per socket, there's 20 logical cores there, don't overcommit, so don't end up, say, on a 2-to-1 ratio. So use 1-to-1. So for every RDSH virtual machine, we think about 4 virtual CPUs, but don't put so many RDSH hosts on that host that you've overcommitted on CPU, because obviously each RDS host is going to be running around 30-odd sessions, so you don't want to cause issues there, because if there's any CPU ready time on a virtual desktop, and that's the time a virtual machine is waiting to be scheduled on a CPU, that's impacting that one user on the virtual desktop. Still not good, even worse on an RDSH host. Again, 32 gig of memory per RDSH host. Again, it depends. What's the session load? Are they just, is the user running Word, or are they looking at rich graphics and anything else that's intensive? So that depends. And after this is roughly around 512 meg per user. It could be a lot less than that. So again, you need to understand what the actual workload is on the RDSH sessions. And then connection servers. So we're getting there. We're nearly at the sizing tool, so thank you for being patient. Why does it say 12 gig of memory there? So the reason we say 12 gig is with the connection server, we have a Java heap size. We allocate up to 10 gig. So just bear that in mind. And this is nothing new, but if you install a connection server, maybe on a Windows server with, say, 6 gig, that Java heap size is set at 6 gig. If you want to add more memory later on, that Java heap size is already set at 6 gig. So we always recommend start from the beginning. I'll say at least 10 gig. And then you'll have a 10 gigabyte Java heap size. So basically, that's the maximum the connection server will use. It just means that later on, as it accepts more connections, maybe you're scaling after a pilot deployment, you don't have to then redeploy the connection server, uninstall and reinstall. So we say 12 gig is a good number for your memory on each connection server. 4 virtual CPUs and 2,000 sessions per connection server. So we say a maximum of 7. This is per cluster, but I mentioned this pod and block. So in your view pod, up to 7 active connection servers. And of course, you will have situations where you have external connections to security servers, and those security servers are paired with, say, another 2 connection servers. So that's a 1-to-1 pairing. So always dedicate connection servers for your external connections that are paired with security servers, and all your internal connections, you'd have maybe 2, 3, 4 dedicated connection servers. So our view security servers, that's something new which you will learn this afternoon. You might have already heard about as access points. So we have an alternative to this now. But a security server, we may want to accept external connections in. We may say this has to use secure ID. There's 2-factor authentication. We have some gateways on there. So we have the PCO over IP secure gateway. So if you're going to be forwarding those connections on, so basically your clients connect to the security server, it then forwards that connection onto the desktop. So your security servers are in a DMZ, for example. We say for every gateway or every security server, around 2,000 sessions. Again, it does depend on the throughput, the CPU of the security server and the performance there. And for Blast Secure Gateway, around 800 connections. Again, don't size to the maximums. It depends on how many concurrent users. So this is around 800 concurrent connections per security server. And I mentioned access points. So in Horizon 6.2, we have something called access point. It's not to replace this, but it's a Linux appliance called access point, which does this role. It's all the same scalability, the same logic applies, but it's an alternative. Like we have vCenter on Windows, there's vCenter on Linux. We have an appliance called Access Point now, and that's coming in the next release. So you'll learn more about that in the 3 o'clock session. I won't go through too much of this, but sizing PC over IP, this is important as well. You could have anything between 160 and 250 kilobits per session, or you could have 3D workloads where they're 11, even up to 20 20 meg per session, so it really depends on the workload. So expect bursts. PC over IP is a bursty protocol. So certainly if you're loaded, if the user on that desktop is launching a full screen image, a high definition video, for example, you're going to see massive bursts to cope with that. So that's what it's designed for, to deliver rich graphics and a good user experience. So make sure you size that as well. So there's loads to think about here. Best practices. You'll get a copy of these slides, so I don't have to read all these off one by one. We've covered some of this. And this is where this comes in. Okay, this is the exciting bit. This is what we've been working on for the last few weeks. This is not a fling, so it's not on labs.vmware.com. It's not an official VMware product yet. This is one of the first few groups to see this. We've shown this internally to some partners. Hasn't been shown other than that. All of that stuff I've just talked about, there's a lot to consider. And as I said before, this is a companion, an aid to what you're doing. As an architect, as a consultant, or even if you're in a pre-sales discussion with a customer, you just want some rough idea of how many servers is this environment going to take up? Do we need multiple pods, or is one pod good enough? So we've got this new tool with a series of steps. It's a guided process. So what's the profile? And my colleague Xingbo, he's going to walk you through this in a moment. What does it actually look like? So you may have a customer name and a project, it might be a POC. It's going to guide you through each of those steps, and you can flick around here. And at the end of this, you get a profile result. So it will tell you how many pods, do you need cloud pods, how many servers you need. But again, and there is actually a note at the top, and when you log in, it says this, there's a disclaimer, do not use this for production sizing. It's just a companion, it's just to give you an idea. But we'll take you through it now. I think you'll be impressed. It's for a version 1, well, it's even not that, it's not even version 1, it's beta. It's very comprehensive. So I'll hand over to you, Xingbo, and you can demonstrate.
Yeah. Great.
Perfect.
This is my MacBook. I know you cannot wait any longer, so let's start.
That's what you're here for, right?
Okay. Here is the live demo show. For Horizon Saturn 2, this is a web page which we deploy on Development Center. Let me refresh and log out and log in again. Sign in. Here you can log in with your My VMware account or just the Partner Center account.
Yeah, so anyone can register for a My VMware account. I'm sure you've all got one anyway.
Yeah, sure. Wait for a short while for internet access. Okay, here we go. You can search Horizon Saturn 2 by typing Y. Okay. So. The first one is our Horizon Saturn 2. In this live demo show, I will create a simple profile first and then show you a real reference case for the global car manufacturer. So let's click Create a New Profile. At first, let's give him a name. So here we just use the sample 2. Okay, the name is this. It doesn't matter. 3, 4. Please input your number of employees. Here we assume it is 1,000.
And by the way, this number of employees is just a guide. It's not limiting you to this. It's just, okay, you may have a pilot and you're going to have 2,000 users in there. It's just a guide, but we're setting up this profile just so you can report on this. You're going to generate a report from this. And what does this look like? So this could be a POC or a pilot.
You know, many software ask for such numbers. For IT outcome, we have desktop transformation only for now. And in the very near future, we will have bring your own device, mobility management, and mobile-enabled workflows for next version. Office location, here I use London as a sample. And the data center, in fact, here ask you to input the data center location. We can also use DC London. User categories. This is an interesting user category that we can define by ourselves. I use For example, worker and designer.
So you're getting used to my English keyboard there.
Yeah, I'm not quite familiar with the keyboard.
And same with the offices and data centers, you can add multiple. You just, however many you need, you just click the plus and you can add multiple data centers or office locations. And you'll see why this makes sense in a moment.
Yeah. You can proceed to the next step by using the navigator or just clicking the next button. And for each user category that we have defined in the first step, you should make some selections. For worker, the first is guest operation system. The default one is Windows, but you can use Linux. And the number of displays, display resolution. Here, departmental applications. If I select this, that means I will use app volumes, which has apps tag for your department.
Just a note on that. So, as Xingbo mentioned, this would translate to app volumes because we can have departmental applications, we can have app stacks, and so on. Later on, in design decisions, you might say, no, I don't want app volumes. This is actually different. And you can override that, just so you're aware. But this is why this is a guide. So we're sort of providing all this information up front, so you can create your use cases, and it will guide you through. But you can customize this.
Yeah, I agree. And if the next one is user-installed applications, you know, in app volumes, we have writable volumes for user-installed applications. So if I select this, which means I will use the writable volumes. And the SaaS application, you should know IDM, VMware Identity Manager. If I select SaaS applications, then I will add some IDM to this profile. Okay. Let's make some simple selection and proceed to next step. Workforce. Here, for each user category, we should define at least one workforce. We require to input the number of users. Here, for example, 400, and office location for this workforce, the data center which this workforce connects to, and the concurrency, we can see 100% at most, external access or not. Of course, I can add workforce by clicking the Add Workforce button. I just input some numbers and proceed to next.
So you can mix and match this to reflect the actual customer environments. You may have, as Xingbo's got here, 2 design. You may have 100 in London. You may have 100 in New York. We only added 1 office when we went through this, but you can choose where everyone's located, split them up. So you can start defining where all these use cases, where the user categories are located.
Yeah. And the fourth step is service quality. Ray, can you introduce service qualities?
Yes, thank you. I mentioned about the VCDX, and this themes, if you are thinking of doing a VCDX, this is very key to any VCDX design. We have 5 service qualities, and we want this to theme in the sizing tool. We want this to be a consideration when you're designing Horizon. This is availability, performance, there's security, there's management and monitoring, and recoverability. These are the 5 principal service qualities that any design should address. So every decision you make, what's the availability? What are the SLAs? What's the recovery time objective? The RPOs. You need to understand: is this highly available? What about the recoverability side? Performance. Who's using this? That use case might need high performance 3D graphics or some scientific modeling on a Linux machine. It really depends. So you could set the entire service class for the design, and we just have bronze, silver, gold. Low, medium, and high. And as you change them, as Xingbo's doing here, it will change the description. So it's explaining what this means. So for high, for example, we're going to have that 100% memory reservation I talked about. So it's going to eliminate your swap files. We're going to have a CPU ratio of 5 with high, or with medium it's 8. So 8 virtual machines per logical core on the host. And obviously, if that's high, you're going to have less virtual machines on the host. If low, you can get more virtual machines. So there is this trade-off. So it's guiding you through that process. Security includes things like the PC over IP encryption level. So even myself, work with this every day, but I go, oh yeah, I forgot about that. You know, they've got a security requirement, so it's prompting you to remember. And this is why we say don't use this to size for a production workload, but take a step back. You know, as you're discovering and maybe working on the conceptual design, these are all the considerations you need to be making, and it's guiding you through that.
Yeah, thank you. The fifth step is infrastructure. The first is host type. We have standard and EvoReal, EvoRack. EvoRack is green now for the next version, but you can select EvoReal or you select standard and input the host memory, CPU, socket number, code number, vSAN or not. Let's click next. The last step for your input is the assessment data. We recommend that the assessment data is very important and they should be as accurate as possible, like the size of C disk and the persistent disk, average peak CPU, memory, peak ALPS, and like that. So you can use some third-party software to generate the assessment data.
So you can see it's fairly straightforward at the moment. It's not asking for a huge amount of information with your assessment data, and if you've used third-party tools, whether it's Lakeside or Liquidware, you're going to have some very comprehensive reports. And our plans for the future is to be able to extract from, say, for example, Lakeside SysTrack and import them into here. So this is today, but we are working on making this more detailed. But we don't want to move away from the fact this is a companion, and you may be in just a customer meeting, and you can have this running and just get some quick results up.
Yeah. So now, congratulations, we have finished all input, and let's see the magic. Let's click next. Here we come the design decisions. Design decisions here are calculated based on the information that you input from step 1 to step 6. That's why they are blue color, and step 7 is green color. So for the global design decisions, we have some basic information for the host and the cluster specification. And for each user category here, we have some suggestions for you. Like for the worker, we suggest you to use VDI. But for the designer, this is not in fact a designer, but a sample, we suggest you to use RDSH. By default, the design decisions are locked, but you can change if you really want. You can click amend and change it to VDI like that. If you deselect that, it will be reset to default the suggestion values by our system.
So you see, if you just want a quick estimate, leave the design decisions recommending it for you. But you might say, no, I don't want RDSH, I can't do that. Or you may not want virtual desktops. You can override those. You can change all these factors, number of hosts per cluster. If you're looking at 3D, further down there's vGPU profiles, the type of graphics card you've got. So yes, it's making decisions for you, but you can override these. So you've got best of both worlds there. And indeed with the operating system as well. I think some of the default, it's always Windows 7 at the moment, but you can just change that.
Windows 7 and R, Windows 2012 is the default.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, we have the profile result, which is the most important part. And the final result for this Sizen tool. You can export the results with this button to PDF, and you can show to your partner as a guide. And here we have the number of pods, 1 or 2, number of data centers. You can see how many virtual desktops are required in R and how many RDS sessions in R. This is very important. I give you the total number of ESSI hosts that are required. For each office location, we show the network requirement. Next is the most important part, I believe, is the management block. You can see how many view composer servers and the number of connection servers, security servers, together with app volume managers, IDM, number of IDM, and the number of vCenter realized operations.
The great thing as well, you look at these results, you think, oh, that's interesting, and you can just click back on any of those stages, make change, and go back to profile results. It's dynamic. Make a change, go back, make a change, go back.
Yeah,
so
sure.
It's really interesting to use, and it's all text today, it's just this list. We're going to be working on a graphical output, and I don't know about you guys, would it be great if it creates a topology, like an architecture diagram with connection servers and pods? Yeah, everyone likes that. So, yeah, that's what we're planning. Thank you. Any questions? Who's got the first question? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the question was on the service qualities. Is that set for everything, the whole design? Or are you thinking like per use case you might have different ones? Yeah, so at the moment it's a global like service quality for your design. So what should that design adhere to? The plan is you can go into design decisions and see some of the things it's changed and tweak those, but we will be looking at, in some service qualities doesn't make sense on a per use case basis because you're not going to have a dedicated cluster or rack for every use case, but we're looking at implementing that in the next version. I've got one more question.
Hi, I've got quite a few users and they mix between office type and very, very high end.
Okay.
For my high end, I've got K2 servers with Apex cards, etc. And with vSphere 5.5, I have a maximum of 4 users on a Cisco C-class server.
Okay.
Just to meet my needs. So I was looking for a tool that could help me balance the number of standard servers for the office workers, as well as to be able to account for the high-end workers. I saw that you had offload cards, etc. You didn't select that in your demonstration, but I was hoping that it could be a balance of just generic servers plus dedicated ones.
Of course, yeah.
Offload cards.
Yeah, so one of the things this will do, if you've got standard office workers, they don't need any 3D high-performance graphics, it will recommend a cluster for those use cases. If you have 3D workloads, maybe you've got K2s, whatever, it will size out that cluster, dedicated cluster, these are how many cards you need, and so on. So it's offering you that guidance, but it will separate them out. And we never recommend to combine them in one cluster, really. It's good to separate those out because they've got different consolidation ratios on the hosts and so on. But it does split those out. Does that answer your question?
Pretty well. Due to security requirements, we can't go to 6 yet. We're stuck on 5.5. Is a tool able to say, here are your 5.5 options versus your 6 options?
So at the moment, this is under the assumption it's 6. And something all the sizing decisions are based on and the formulas behind the scenes is based on the latest version of Horizon, the latest maximums. So when, for example, Horizon 2 comes out with access point and things like that, we'll input that into the tool. So we can't select at the moment, and that's a good point, but we can't select, we're using 5.5 vSphere hosts, that kind of thing. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah, got one here. Okay,
Yeah.
yes. So I'll repeat the question. The question was any idea when the assessment data can be imported into the sizing tool. So we're initially working with Lakeside on this, and we're trying to get a format that we can input. So I think for the next version, Xingbo, do you think?
Next version we are considering to open API for our partners to import data. You can import data to Silent 2 or just use Silent 2 as an API.
Yep, got one more question.
Good Lord willing and the creek don't rise. What's the rough, I understand what I'm saying, rough timeline on getting this to the public market?
Okay, so the question is when's this going to be available for everyone to use?
Good Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
We'd like this to be available for everyone by VMworld Europe, so that's October, but don't quote me on that. We've got a lot of work to do still. You've seen it's still not even a version 1. The potential's there, and as Xingbo mentioned, there's API. We can actually export that profile that we did. If you're working through a profile, you can export that, use a JSON format, and you can give that to your colleague, and then they can import it as well. So we've got that foundation there now, that framework. So yeah, that's what we're aiming for is around October, but I haven't got a specific date.
In our use case, we have several peripherals that we have to have at our end client. Most of our remote users have 1, 2, possibly 3 peripherals that they have to redirect back in.
Okay.
Would the tool be taking into account the connectivity of the other peripherals that you're going to need?
Yeah, so one of the things, the sort of question around USB device redirection.
Yeah, we actually use USB device redirection. We're actually doing a printer, scanner, and then we're actually working with software engineering right now because we have a problem with our software redirection, our scanner redirection in a MFP.
Yeah, so where the tool is today, it will ask as part of those, the use case, as you're going through each user category, it will say, do you need access to local USB devices? In other words, USB redirection. Do you need access to local files? That's client drive redirection. Printers, it will ask those questions, and then it will give you those recommendations. And in design decisions, it will say you need USB redirection. Obviously, there's considerations for PC over IP bandwidth sizing. We never showed you that because we're obviously out of time, but it will recommend what you need to consider there. We haven't gone any more granular than that in terms of scanners and depending on what the device is, but that's some good feedback as well because we can certainly build upon that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Did the tool also have storage estimates with linked clones?
It
and
does,
non-linked
yes.
clones?
So for each data center in that profile results, we go through the desktop block, the management block, the pod, all the servers, and then there's a storage section, a dedicated storage section, so the total average peak IOPS, and capacity, all of that's in there as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, and the vSAN sizing is to be added.
Of course. So you've probably seen there's a vSAN sizing calculator out there. We link to that within the tool, and we're going to be working with those guys because obviously there's no point having just 2 separate tools. It may stay separate, but we want that interaction between them. So we're looking at an export that we can export to vSAN or virtual SAN sizing, and then you can size that as well. Yeah.
In our environment, we have saturated the 7 connection server maximum. We have additional use cases for like 2-factor, things like that. So we need to stand up another pod. Is there we haven't been able to find or talk to anybody that says whether or not you can attach 2 view pods to the same vCenter. Is that supported or is that not supported, or is that something you can't tell me either?
So yes, we sort of define that view block as being that vCenter. So if you're going to have multiple vCenters, we recommend it's just multiple blocks. But you're saying you've hit that 7 connection server limit. How many total virtual desktops or total sessions have you got there?
Right now we're about 4,000, but
okay.
We're not reaching the maximums of the connection servers, but we've reached the maximum because for redundancy you have 2 here, 2 here, 2 here. So
obviously with 7 connection servers, the real limit there is it's around 2,000 per connection server, but the actual limit is 10,000. So we're not saying 14,000 if you do the maths, it's 10,000 sessions. Speak to me afterwards as well, because there might be something, even though we support up to 7, there might be something we can do to 8, 9, 10 on that as well.
Thank you.
Do you have recommendations on assessments for visual graphics? Like right now we're using Liquidware Labs and it pulls numbers, but turns out they're kind of arbitrary.
Good point. Yeah, so for 3D workloads and what's happening there, no, I can't answer that off the top of my head, but if you speak to me afterwards, I've got someone at NVIDIA that can talk to you about that. They might be able to give you some recommendations there. So if you've got a few minutes to hang around, I can put you in touch with someone at NVIDIA that can help you with that.
I know they've been working with Liquidware quite a bit
okay.
that pulls something together, so hopefully
I'm not sure, because I haven't done any assessments myself for 3D workloads, but I can certainly find out for you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. For scenarios that exceed the cloud pod architecture, if we exceed those maximums, what's your recommendations?
So, just repeat the question, just so I understand the question.
Like 50,000 VDI.
So the maximums in CloudPod?
No, so CloudPod architecture has session maximum, right?
Yes.
So if we have a scenario where we have to go beyond that, we can't use CTA?
Yeah, so today we say for a pod it's 10,000 sessions, and even though you can have 4 pods in your CloudPod architecture, don't exceed more than 20,000 sessions. That's today. So unfortunately, if you want to go beyond that, then it's multiple cloud pods. But we're working on that because I know, theoretically, we can certainly go beyond 20,000. If you've got a special use case where you need to go beyond that 20,000, do speak to us because I'm sure if we can speak to our support we may be able to support that. It does depend on your particular architecture and setup, but yeah, 20,000 is officially supported, but I know there's some, we can make some exceptions depending on the specifics there.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we'd be grateful if you could fill out the survey. Hopefully you've enjoyed that, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.